All right, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Torah Studies. This is our weekly deep dive into the Torah portion and into the soul of a Torah portion theme. Today, we have a very unique theme that we're going to cover. But first, let's talk about what it is that we typically try to avoid, and that is thinking about, discussing, or revealing our imperfections. Right. Now, obviously, present company excluded because we're all perfect, right? Exactly. Now, the way it works is like this. Everyone knows their imperfections, but listen, when I say everyone, I don't mean everyone, but most of us, or many of us, or some of us, right? We know our imperfections, but we choose to hide our imperfections lest others see our imperfection. How do I know this? Because I've been on Instagram before. Now, I'm not like super active person on Instagram. We post some things for, Chabad, Intown Jewish Academy, etc. But I've seen Instagram before. Everyone's like, filtered. And when I say filtered, like, everything looks amazing. Everything looks perfect, right? Life is great. Life is grand. Life is maybe 100 grand. Everything is amazing, right? And that's the way it looks. That's the way it looks. However, real life is not always an Instagram picture. Real life does not always reflect the perfection of the gram, because in truth, we're all complicated and life is complicated, and we're not always, winning or achieving or being perfect the way, or life is not as perfect as we would like, and we're not as perfect as perhaps we would like. Things are complicated. But how often do we feel safe and secure to reveal our imperfections? For that, we need safe spaces. No, but in truth, for that, we have to have a lot of confidence. Maybe that's not the right word. We have to be very real to be vulnerable. It's not easy to be vulnerable. You meet someone and say, instead of saying, hey, so what do? You imagine you just met someone and you say, hey, tell me what's wrong with you? Like, what are your imperfections? What are your flaws? Great opening line. See how far that gets you. Right. Although, right now, yeah, it's like, whoa, this guy's deep, right? No, but like, so who knows? It could work. Let's welcome a few more people. Let's welcome Sarah, and who else joined? Maybe that's it. Okay. So relatively rarely do we indulge in we indulge in our imperfections, but rarely do we divulge. That's what I'm looking for. Divulge our imperfections. We keep it close to the chest. We try to ignore, we try to kind of gloss over it. Now, there is a statement from our sages, Ava techaseh p'shayim, that love conceals all blemishes, right? So love is the ultimate concealer. The filter that makes everything look a little bit hazy. I think they pioneered that with television, didn't they? With television, there was like a filter that kind of made things a little bit hazy. Yeah. All right. Listen, I think so. Who knows? I could be wrong, but we'll go with it anyway. So there's like this glossy filter or this hazy filter a hazy filter that glosses over everything, makes everything look nice and smooth. That is kind of the way we look at ourselves, right? We look at ourselves and we're like, oh, not so bad. Not so bad. I don't mean physically. I mean, could also be physically, but I mean like the stuff that we have to work on. It's like, all right, not so bad. Okay. Yeah. It's not perfect, but we tell ourselves like, nothing that I couldn't take care of. If I really wanted to, I could totally take care of that today, tomorrow. No big deal. And I will. No big deal. So it doesn't bother us because it's not like a real issue. A real issue is something that I couldn't solve, but I can totally solve this. I got this. Said everyone with a gambling problem ever. I got this. One more hand. Boom, we got this. But that's the nature of things, because who wants to feel the full brunt of what's not working? We feel rather that, things are fine. More or less, things are fine. Again, why? What's the core of it? It's self-love. Ava techaseh p'shayim, that love, techaseh covers over, p'shayim over iniquity or over blemish. So self-love covers over. By the way, when our sages, when the Torah tells us to love your fellow as yourself, according to Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy, you know what it means to love your fellow as yourself? Just like you gloss over your imperfections, you should, when you look at someone else and you see their imperfections, you should gloss over their imperfections. Try that on for size. In other words, instead of only like overlooking yours, imagine you overlook theirs. Not so bad. I'm sure he means well. Whoever says that. Somebody does something wrong, says something wrong. Oh, we go after them. It's like, how dare they? Me? That's fine. It's like the story where the two Jewish mothers are meet for lunch, and so they ask about each other's kids. So the one asks the other, so how's your son? So the mother says, oh, unbelievable. He's locked into this, just a horrible marriage. My son, he has to he slaves away at work, and he slaves away at work, and his wife, she spends money and he has to provide for her, and he does all the work and she sits back and it's like, it's crazy. He's working so hard. And then she asks, so how's your daughter? Oh, she's great. Her husband takes care of her. He does everything for her. You with me on this, right? So when it's this way, it's this way. When it's that way, it's that way, right? So it's like in life, we will kind of want it both ways. That when it comes to us, right? When it comes to us, so we overlook everything. When it comes to the other, magnifying glass, like fine-tooth comb, like the way we look for chametz before Pesach, we're looking for every crumb. It's been said that we should only look at ourselves with the same magnifying glass that we look for the chametz in the house before Passover, right? Everyone's looking like, is that a crumb? Get rid of the crumb. Like, lest there be a crumb. Hold on, slow it down. Every little blemish is a problem. Okay, just as long as we're listening to what we're saying, then maybe we're in a, because what's the implication? People shop for an esrog before Sukkot. Yeah, I mean, in certain communities, like in New York, you go there, people have those magnifying glasses that they use for diamonds. People will snap those on, looking at the esrog. It's like, is it perfectly yellow or green? Everyone's got a different color. Some like it yellow, some like a little bit green, some like it shiny, some like a little waxy looking, some like it this shape, that shape, and everyone's just examining it. And it's okay. As long as your esrog is perfect, I guess we're okay, right? The question is not about the esrog. The question is what's going on inside. So I think in life, there's a challenge in really looking within, and this week's Torah portion, as we'll see soon, reminds us about the necessity. It reminds us about the how critical it is to really look inside. So let me tell you a little bit about a jeweler's loop. There you go, loop. I can't, in the comments, I can't see if that's an L or a T.
Loop, Ari.
Loop. I can't. Is it a loop? Is it toupee? I'm kidding. All right, so now, right. So here is the context of this week. So this week's Torah portion is called Shemini. And Shemini talks about the opening day of the tabernacle. The Jewish people, the Exodus happened. They got out of, they got out of Egypt. Then they got the Torah. They worshiped the golden calf. Whoops. And then the National Reclamation Project, the big idea of tshuva, of repentance, happened through the building of the Mishkan. And they built it for a while. And then there was a 7 days of inauguration. And finally, on the 8th day, it was opening day. And the Mishkan was in business. It's fantastic. That's where our Torah portion opens. On that day, there was incredible joy, followed by incredible agony with and pain and loss with the passing of Aaron's 2 sons. Then the second half of the Torah portion talks about the laws of kosher. So it's an action-packed Torah portion, which we're going to talk about none of the above. What we're going to talk about today is the mafter. What is the mafter? So let me explain a little bit about the mafter. There's mafter and then there's haftorah. Haftorah and mafter are not the same thing. So I just want to clarify what's going on. And if you've been in synagogue on Shabbat morning, so you've definitely seen this in action, but I'm going to break down exactly what's going on. So every week in Shul, every Shabbat morning, we read, hey, Sandrine, good to see you. So every Shabbat morning, we pull out, if there's a minyan, assume there's a minyan, we go to the ark, which is right behind me. We pull out a Torah scroll. Okay. Torah scroll is placed in the bima, right? Not a beamer. That's a car that you drive, a bima. and is rolled to it's usually in the right place, ish, and you open it up at the beginning of the Torah portion, and you have 7 readings. 7 people are called up to the Torah, and the Torah portion is divided into 7 readings of varying lengths. And after that, you call up an 8th person. And that is called up for the maftir. The 8th person gets called up, and a very small reading is read, typically 3 or 4 verses, and it's typically a repeat of the end of the 7th reading. It's the last few verses, just doing it again. And then the person that called up to do that for that 8th reading reads the Haftorah from a book at the Bima. That's what happens. Why does this happen? What's going on? So I'll give you a historical context. It's fascinating. There was a time in ancient Israel where foreign entities, foreign powers ruled the land, and they forbade the Jewish people, they forbade our people from reading the Torah publicly. And so can you imagine, after so many years, after hundreds of years, even more, thousands of years perhaps, hundreds, definitely centuries of reading the Torah every Shabbat, imagine suddenly you can't read the Torah. You can't pull out the Torah scrolls and read it. So what did they do? So Jews are very creative. So instead of reading from the Torah, they read from the books of the prophets. They read from Nach, from Nevi'im and Ksuvim. They read from Navi, the books of the prophets. And they replaced the Torah reading with the books of the prophets. Now, when that decree was rescinded, and the Jews were, once again, the Jewish people were able to read from the Torah. So they didn't want to drop the custom, this new tradition of reading from the prophets. So they decided to do both. Go back to the Torah reading, but at the end of the Torah reading, also read the Haftorah, also read from the books of the prophets. But the way they did it when they had, I hope I don't lose anybody here. The way they did it when there was no Torah reading, when that was banned, is they called someone up to make a blessing before and after reading from the books of the prophets. Okay, so now they wanted to do that as well. Once they were able to do the Torah reading again, they wanted to do both. But here's the thing. If you call up people to make a blessing on the Torah, and then you, 7 people, and then you call up someone else to read it, to only read from the books of the prophet, that seems like you're equating the 5 books of Moses with the other books. So the way around it is you call up the 8th person who's going to read from the prophets, but first there's a short reading from the Torah that's a lead into the books of the prophets. Are you with me on this? So the 8th person gets a few verses read from the Torah itself, and then you put away the Torah, and then you pull out the other one, but it's all part of the same kind of that same genre. That 8th person does both, but they don't exclusively do the books of the prophets, because that would indicate that that's equal value to the Torah reading. So you do a separate reading, but you also roll it into the Torah reading, so it's kind of a hybrid. You do a little Torah and then a little Haftorah. That same person does it. So if you go to come to shul, whoever gets the eighth aliyah, or whoever gets the 8th, called 8th to the Torah, is the one who will get the last few verses plus the reading from the book of the Haftorah.
Never know.
That's the history. Yeah. So that explains the mechanism. Basically, it used to be just the Torah, then it was just the Haftorah, then because of the decree, then when the decree was rescinded, they wanted to keep both, but they wanted to make sure that it didn't seem like it's equal footing. So they made sure that the Haftorah should also have a few verses of Torah, and then you go into that one. Wonderful. Now, that's how it is every week, except for certain weeks, where, based on a special occasion, you actually read not the last few verses of the Torah reading, just to roll into the, but you actually read another part of the Torah that is of note. So in other words, you would read the normal Torah reading, 7 readings, and you finish the parsha, the Torah reading. But then, in order for the lead-in for the Haftorah, instead of reading the last few verses again, you'll read something topical related to the week. So a few times in the year, you switch out the last few verses for the maftir, and that's called maftir. So the Haftorah is maftir is the addition, the few verses that are the lead-in. So instead of the few verses at the end of the portion, you introduce a new reading. Like a few weeks ago, we read Zachar, right? Instead of the end of the Torah portion, we read the section that talks about the war against Amalek and how we're to remember to destroy the remembrance of it's very complicated, very complicated. We have to remember to destroy any memory of Amalek. So we read that as the maftir, the Shabbat before Purim, because Purim, of course, is Haman was from Amalek, was from that nation. And so to remember, to kind of lead into Purim, so when that Purim can't fall out on Shabbat. So whatever week it falls out, the Shabbat before, instead of the maftir being the last few verses of the Torah portion, you read another section. You might pull out a second Torah to read another section of a few verses that talk about Amalek. So you keep it topical. So there are, right before Passover, there are actually 4 special weeks that have 4 special maftirs. This week, this coming Shabbat, is one of them. We're going to pull out 2 Torahs. One, Para. This week is Para. So we have the regular Torah portion of Shemini, but then we're going to pull out a second portion just for a few verses. I mean, it's a little bit more than a few this time, but it's topical. What's the topic this week? The topic is the Para Aduma, the red heifer. Why are we talking about the red heifer? Listen to this. Listen to this. Because in ancient times, Passover, everyone was required to bring a Paschal lamb. And to bring a Paschal lamb, right, you have to be in a state of purity. Well, what if you're not in a state of purity? So then you need a red heifer. So to remind everyone, get your red heifer in, right? Make sure you're ready for the red heifer. Make sure you're pure. Passover is coming, right? Nowadays, we have other reminders. Yeah, you don't need to read Parshas Para. You don't need to read Para because you go to Kroger. Hey, you go to Kroger. They have a whole section. Passover. Boom. Boom. Passover. Oh, Passover's coming. Oh, you were there this morning?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's your hood now. Yeah. Yeah. You want oil? Yeah. You want mayonnaise? You got it. Yeah. Kroger is very good. If only Chabad was so organized, like weeks, months before they're organized, everything's ordered. It's very impressive. Very impressive. I'm not suggesting we go last minute, but not as they're like 6 months ahead, maybe even a year ahead. Last year they were sold out. Last year they're sold. This is a reminder, a PSA. This was not initially in the scope of tonight's class, but a PSA. Start your Passover shopping. Somebody mentioned to me, maybe it was Mark, about matzah at Costco. Was that Mark? Thumbs up, hand on the wheel. No. All right. Anyway, the point is like this. The point is,
I sent you something, Ari, about matzah and Costco.
Could be, but I think somebody local told me about that. So here's the deal. This weekend, this Shabbat, we're going to read us the maftir for the lead-in for the Haftorah. We're going to read a section talking about the red heifer, how it was prepared and what it was done. And essentially, the short of it is, if somebody had contact with a dead body, dead human body, which renders them the highest level of impurity. Impurity is not a bad thing. It's not a judgment. It's a thing. It's a thing. It's about life and death. Life is pure. Death is impure. So someone that comes in contact with a human body, with a dead human body, a human corpse, that renders someone the most severe level of impurity. The only way out of that level of impurity, even if you go to a mikveh, it doesn't help. You got to have the red heifer ashes sprinkled on you. The process is like this, complicated process or whatever. There's a red heifer. You take a red heifer, perfectly red cow, even if it has 2 black hairs, it's disqualified. They shech the animal, they slaughter the animal, they burn the animal, then they take its ashes, they mix it with special water called living water from a living stream of water, living spring of water. So they have ashes mixed with water. The person that became impure, they sprinkle this water mixture, the ash water mixture on them on day number 3 and day number 7 of this purification process. And then there's other things that are done also. On day number 8, they go to the mikvah, they bring some offerings. Cha-ching. I don't know if that's the right expression, cha-ching, I don't know. Kaboom, whatever it is, whatever the right idiom is, and they are now purified. That's what the paraduma is, red heifer, day 3, day 7, the sprinkling, and day number 8, mikvah, and some sacrifices, and we are done. Okay, now, why do we read it this weekend? And the answer that I told you is because Passover is coming. And if Passover is coming and everyone's got to bring a carbon pesach, a Paschal lamb, right? It's got to have a Paschal lamb. You got to have a Paschal lamb means you got to show up to the temple. You got to show up to the temple. You got to be pure. So if you have to be pure, you may need a red heifer. So let's talk about the red heifer to make sure that we're getting all prepared for this. Make sense? Yes? Okay. By the way, this is a bit of a longer intro, but I wanted to make sure we know what a mafter is, what a haftorah is, what a para is, So this week is called Parashas Para. We read the section of Para. Now, let's begin with text number 1. Okay? Let's begin with text number 1. And this comes from Rashi, Tractate Megillah. And Ed, if you don't mind, I'll give you the cue in a moment. Please read text number 1.
The portion of the red heifer is read just prior to Passover to remind the Jewish people to purify themselves so that they could bring the Paschal offering in a state of ritual purity.
There you go. It's almost like I said that. Unbelievable. Rashi. What a guy. He took the words right out of my mouth. Okay, so Rashi says, and he's explained the Talmud, so it's in the Talmud as well, that the reason why we're reading Para this weekend, out of nowhere, it's not the Torah portion. The reason why we insert it as the mafter instead of the last few verses is because it's a reminder. Hey, don't forget, make sure you get if you need, make sure you get a red heifer situation going on. Now, obviously today we don't have a temple and we don't have a Paschal lamb, we don't have, and we're all in a state of impurity. So why are we reading it today? Well, number one, it's a reminder of what used to be back in the day, what this time of year would have been if we had a temple. Number two, we also are asking for Mashiach about 7 times each Amidah prayer, so 3 times a day. So yeah, we should probably, if we're actually asking for Mashiach, what they say, be careful what you ask for, you might just get it. So please God, Mashiach is going to come, and then we'll need to bring Paschal lamb, so we'll need a red heifer. So it seems like a very fine week to talk about it. Okay, before Passover, we talk about it. A few weeks out, great. By the way, next Shabbat, not this weekend, but the next weekend is HaChodesh. So this week is Para, next week is HaChodesh. What's HaChodesh? We also read a special section. It's from the book of Exodus that talks about the Mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh and the Paschal lamb itself. So the week before the Paschal lamb, we read about the red heifer because you can't bring the Paschal lamb without the red heifer purification if you need it. Okay, now let's look at another interesting tidbit. Centurion, please read this one. Text number 2 from Rambam. Maimonides talks about how, in addition to us reading about the red heifer this Shabbat, in general, they had to have, back in the day, red heifer ashes at the ready, just in case. Take a read, please.
We were commanded to offer a red heifer so that its ashes would be prepared for anyone who required purification as a first stage. It should be preserved for the congregation of the Jewish people. So
Maimonides says that it's a mitzvah to have a stash of red heifer ashes ready to go in case the folks need it. Because the verse says it should be preserved for the congregation of the Jewish people. What does it mean preserved? Have it at the ready. You never know when somebody might need it. You got to have your red heifer ashes lined up. By the way, the red heifer was not an easy thing to come up with, because how many cows are perfectly red without any black hairs? It's very rare. The Talmud tells us a story, crazy story about how back in the day when the temple stood, how the Jewish people needed a red heifer and they were looking for a red heifer, and there was only one animal that they could find that tracked down that was perfectly red. And the guy, supply and demand. Right? If you know that the Jews need a red heifer and you happen to have a red heifer in your stable, pen, farm,
Herd.
Yeah, there you go.
Pasture. Heifers are in pastures.
There you go. All right. So if you have a red heifer, right, hanging around, you know what? It's we call that inflation in modern times. Supply chain and inflation. Those are the buzzwords, right? The price is going to go up. Mark, gas prices, buddy. You're driving so much. I'm kidding. We love you, man. So here's the deal. I love looking at the background change. It looks like a studio. Back in the old movies where the guys are sitting there, you can kind of see that it's fake, but it's just, I don't know why it looks fake in a box. Anyway, the point is like this. The point is that, a red heifer was hard to come by. It wasn't like you have these perfectly red cows just hanging around. Every so often you hear about this, like in modern times, like in Texas, some, religious cattle farmers, I got a red heifer. It's yeah, he's breeding red heifers, and we found 2 black hairs. It was good while it lasted. So look, it was very rare. Rambam says, Maimonides says, you got to keep, a stash of red heifer ashes at the ready in case somebody needs it. Okay, good, perfect. So we're going to proceed to ask a question. The question that we're going to ask applies to both of the ideas that we just detailed. Idea number one, just to recap, idea number one is that on the Shabbat before the month of Nisan, we read the section of Para to as a reminder of the paraduma, of the purification that was needed before bringing the Paschal lamb. Great. And we also learned from Maimonides that they had to keep a jar, a bucket, whatever the size was, a container of red heifer ashes on behalf of whoever needed it. Great, wonderful. The question is like this: how many people actually needed the red heifer purification? Right? If you think about it, what was the percentage of people who needed it? Now you might say, well, everyone needed it because you had to bring a Paschal lamb. Not so fast. Who had to actually bring the Paschal lamb? As we'll see soon, a very slender percentage of the people had to actually bring a Paschal lamb. Most people were not required to bring a Paschal lamb, which means that most people didn't need to hear about the red heifer, which means that why is the PSA for everybody? Just let whoever needs to know, or if you need to know, then find out what you need to know. Why make this a broad announcement, right? It's like the emails that you get from me. Like, here's the Joy Factory. I'm already happy. I don't need this email. I'm kidding. By the way, Joy Factory tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Don't forget to sign up. It's going to be amazing. Even if you're happy, you get happier. All right. That's tomorrow night. You got to be happy. All right. Next. So the question that we're asking is, why the need for a large scale maftir, a large scale broadcast in synagogues around the world, for all these years about the red heifer? How many people even back in the day needed it? I mean, today we don't even need it all because right the second, but like how many people needed it? So to illustrate this, I'm going to read text number 3. Okay. I'm going to read text number 3. This is from the Mishnah in Chagiga. The Mishnah in Chagiga details exactly who was required to go to Jerusalem and bring the Paschal lamb. Take a look-see at everyone who was excluded from this obligation. Okay, in other words, here are all the people who did not need to go to Jerusalem, who did not need to bring a Paschal lamb offering. Text number 3. All are so I love how it starts. All are obligated to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem during the 3 pilgrim festivals, and thus participate in the mitzvah of appearance, i.e., to appear in the temple to sacrifice an offering. So everyone's obligated except a deaf mute, the mentally incompetent, and a minor, a tumtum, hermaphrodite, and women in general. Women are exempt from time, as we'll see soon. Women are exempt from time-based commandments. So if you have to be in the temple on a certain day at a certain time, it's not an obligation. Women could, I know I'm pausing here, but I think it's very important to clarify. Women could choose to make the pilgrimage, but they're not obligated due to the understanding of not everyone can make it out all the time. And slaves who are not emancipated, and the lame, and the blind, and the sick, and the old, and one who's unable to ascend to Jerusalem on their own legs. So essentially what we have here is everyone has to be there. Everyone has to offer a Paschal lamb, except for like at least 3/4 of the people. That's what it's. So if you're older, you don't have to go. If you're younger, you have to go. If you're a woman, you don't have to go. If you're in any of these other categories of people, you don't have to go, right? And so, who actually ended up going? Pretty much men who were not too old, not too young, and I'm sorry. There's more qualifications. You had to own a house. You had to be a landowner. If you're renting, you don't have to go. You don't have to go. Only if you own the house were you supposed to go. So you have a lot of exceptions. And only if you lived in the land of Israel. If you lived outside of Israel, you didn't have to go at all. So what we see here is that there are some major exceptions to the pilgrimage requirement. So the starting point, and this is even the way the Mishnah starts, the starting point is, everyone should go to Jerusalem for the holidays. That's what we call it, the pilgrimage festivals, the festivals where you should make a pilgrimage. Go to Jerusalem, spend the holiday in the capital city, by the temple. Spend it in Jerusalem. Except, a tumtum is someone who, tumtum, not Tintin. Remember Tintin? Remember it's like the comic book. Yeah. Anyway, tumtum is someone whose gender is unclear because they're we'll just speak in a lashon nekiah, in a very clean way, their gender organs are covered, are concealed. So there's no indication of male or female, at least externally, there's no indication of male or female. That's a tumtum. Okay, now, so what's the idea here? The idea here is that we have all of these categories of exceptions and major categories of exceptions. Anyone young, anyone old, women, anyone who didn't own a home, men, the remaining category, right? Men who didn't own a home and men who lived outside of Israel, none of these categories were obligated. Now, if they chose to go, they could choose. Anyone who wants to go can go. The doors are open and everyone's welcome and encouraged even. The question is not about if you should go. The question is, are you obligated to the point that if you don't show up, it's held against you? Which is, again, I just explain why women are exempt from most positive time-based mitzvot. It's not, the simple reason is, given pragmatic considerations, biological considerations, and the idea of, childbearing, pregnancy, young children, babies, etc., nursing, v'chuli, etc. So the reality is that to obligate a woman to be in Jerusalem for a holiday is just not always feasible. So therefore, instead of saying, well, some women can between these ages and those, it's like, you don't have to. If you're able to and you want to, hey, absolutely do it. But it's not an obligation. So that's why in general, women, that's most understands why women are exempt from time-based, time-constrained mitzvah. But back to our story, here's my point. I don't want to lose the plot here. The plot is, the point is that of the Jewish nation, a very small percentage of individuals actually were required to show up to the temple on Passover and bring the Paschal lamb. And if that's the case, right? And if that's the case, so why are we making a broad declaration? Why are we reading from the Torah and saying, hey, hear ye, don't forget about the red heifer to be purified? Why does everyone need to know about the red heifer? Only the people that are going to Jerusalem need to know about it. That's a very small percentage. And I know what you're thinking. So who cares if everyone knows about it? Like, what's wrong with making a broad announcement? Okay, there's nothing wrong with it, but why the necessity to make such a broad announcement if at the end of the day, not that a relatively slender percentage are actually going to be the ones that are requiring the purification because they're going to be offering a sacrifice? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. Why they need to make a broad declaration, broad announcement if it's not pertaining to everybody? And furthermore, why the need to maintain red heifer ashes on hand, right, for a very small percentage of people who might need it? Right? Why? It's almost like we have to keep it on behalf of everyone. As Maimonides said in, I think, text number 2, he's like, it has to be preserved for the congregation of the Jewish people. The people need it. The people need it. Who says the people need it? Right? The people need it. Who says? Some people need it, not the people. So why the need to keep a vial on hand, to keep it on hand? Okay, that is what we're left with. So therefore, we have a question. We have 2 questions. Question number 1, why the broad announcement? Question number 2, why the need to keep it on hand if it's only pertaining to a very small percentage of the people? So to understand, there are many ways to answer this question. The truth is, this question is really a lead into the answer. Sometimes you ask a question because you want to give the answer. So this is one of those questions. Because you could say, why make an announcement? Why not make an announcement for those that need it? Listen, if it's not pertinent to you, then ignore it, right? Why keep it on hand? For whoever needs it. Not for the whole people, for whoever needs it. So these questions are not unanswerable. But the question allows us to give an answer that totally shifts our perspective on this whole topic and really opens up a marvelous idea. And the angle that we're going to take right now is that everyone needed the red heifer. Even if they weren't going to Jerusalem, even if they weren't going to offer a Paschal lamb, everyone needed a red heifer. And they needed the announcement of the red heifer. They needed the ash of the red heifer spiritually. Every mitzvah has a spiritual layer. Every mitzvah has a spiritual counterpart. When I say counterpart, I mean it has a spiritual dynamic. So every mitzvah has a body and a soul. You look at a mitzvah and you're like, okay, that's the mechanic of the mitzvah, but what does it represent? What's the energy? What's the soul of the mitzvah? Everything has a soul. Every piece of Torah has a soul. In fact, I believe it was the Shalah HaKadosh, the Holy Shalah, who said that Torah speaks about spiritual things and only alludes to, it hints to the physical things. Not the way we typically think. The Torah speaks to physical things and hints to spiritual dynamics, the other way around. Torah primarily speaks about spiritual realities and only alludes to the physical reality. The same thing is true when it comes to the red heifer, the paraduma. So let's break down what is the red heifer spiritually. What is the red heifer spiritually? And to understand what the red heifer is spiritually, we have to understand what it means to get in contact with death spiritually. Because why did you need a red heifer? Because you got in contact with a dead body. So what does that mean? So here we go. What is death? Death is separation of body and soul. Death is a state, obviously, goes without saying, right? Death is a state of a lack of life, an absence of life, or disconnection from life. Let's put it this way. For, let's say, 120 years, please God, right? A body is being powered by a soul, right? You have a body and you have a battery pack. You have the soul that's an energizer battery or energizer bunny, whatever it is, right? It's like, it's animating, vivifying, right? Enlivening the body. You pull out the battery and the body is no longer alive. That's the way it works, okay? In other words, death is when death is, and yes, sleep is 1/60 of death as well, right? So death is an absence of life or disconnection from life, when the body is unplugged from the source, from the life. So what is analogous to that? What's analogous to that is sin. When you and I commit a sin, when human beings do something that against God's will, essentially, that is a form of spiritual death. Let me explain. I'm not trying to over dramatize it, but I'm trying to explain what it means on a very practical level. If death is unplugging from life, that is the same thing as sin is. It's unplugging from the source of life, right? God says, this is the way I want something to work. And a person says, no, thank you. I'm going to do it my way. That means that a person is unplugging from the source of life. Right? What do we say when we raise the Torah up at the end of the Torah reading? Right? It's a tree of life for those who hold on to it. Right? How do we sing it here? No, how do we sing it here? That's not how it sing it here. That's not right now, yeah, but that's not how we sing it here. How do we sing it here? Whatever. Anyway, however we sing it here, we sing it here. The bottom line is that it's anyway, it doesn't matter. The song doesn't matter. I'll remember after the class. The song doesn't matter. What matters is you guys got it?
I think she was right off at first.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I stand corrected. Anyway, here's the point. The point is that the message is that Torah is a tree of life. In other words, when we're following the ways of Torah, we're plugged into life because God is the source of life. And we're following the path of life. So we're plugged into life. What happens when we say no thank you to God? No thank you, I got my own way. So what's happening is, oops, unplugged. So true story tonight. I have a little nook in my kitchen. Some of you have been there before. A little nook in the kitchen where I have some dairy, some milchik appliances because we have a meat oven. The oven is for meat. We have a little dairy like countertop convection toaster oven situation, along with a hot water pot that keeps the hot water for coffee and tea and whatnot. And we have also we have other appliances. So there's like a little bit of a pizza maker thing. It's like a round Betty Crocker red thing where you can make pizza or eggs and cookie. It's like a flat surface, nonstick surface, round, and it's wonderfully multi-purpose. Happens to be tonight, multiple appliances were running at the same time. And what happens when multiple appliances run at the same time? So it tripped the whatever it was, and it took a few minutes to get things back going. And the kids were fascinated because it hasn't been a while, and they haven't been around for a while, some of them. So like maybe their first time seeing this, like, oh, it doesn't work. Because I mean, the power goes out, but suddenly like only one part of the power goes out. Like what? So I opened up the thing and I showed them how things.
Circuit breaker.
Yeah, it's a whole party. So what's the point? The point is that what we have here is a disconnection from the power, right? What happens when you disconnect from the power source, when there's an interruption, when there's a break, now you're on your own. So a person says, you know what, God, thank you very much for your opinion about how I should live my life. But you know what? I'm going to do it my way. So what's happening is the person is unplugging themselves from the source, saying, thank you, but no thank you. I have my own way, I have my own path, I have my own desire, my own intention, my own will, my own philosophies, my own this, and that's it. I'm going my own way. So that is death. With that, I don't, again, not to be over dramatic, but that's a form of death. Every sin is a form of death. So so what do you do after that? So what's the next? So how do you purify from death? What's the answer in halacha? What's the answer in Jewish law? You need a red heifer. So what's a red heifer? So we know what death is. Coming in contact with death means person makes a mistake, a person sins. What's the solution for that? The red heifer. So now the question is, what's the red heifer spiritually? The red heifer is synonymous with teshuvah. What's teshuvah? Teshuvah is repentance, getting back, plugging back in. It's not that complicated. I unplugged. Whoops. So what's the solution? Right? Crying. Trust me. If we're crying, then the pizza maker doesn't get back on. You know what the solution is? Go over and flick that thing back and forth. You got to plug it back in. That's what we're doing. You plug it back in, and now you got power. Now you're good to go. So that's the message here as well. Sin is death, because sin is unplugging from the source of life. What's the solution? The red heifer. What's the red heifer about? Plugging back in. Where do we see that in the red heifer? Give me a moment. We'll get there in a minute. But first, the major idea here is that the red heifer is the idea of tshuva. Text number 5. Elio, if you don't mind, please reading this. I'm pulling it up on the screen right now. Text number 5, page 196.
The red heifer represents the concept of repentance. The spiritual parallel of ritual impurity that is contracted through contact with the dead body is the principle of your sins separate you from God. This means that when we lack, quote, and you are attached to God, your God, unquote, we also lack, God forbid, you are alive in this day. The red heifer, which is synonymous with repentance, purifies us and reinstates our bond with our origin and source, the living God.
So this text, it's translated a little bit, I don't know, a little bit literally over here, so it reads a little bit awkwardly, in my opinion. Anyway, the point is that it parallels the 2 points that I made before a moment ago, right? So sin equals death, red heifer equals tshuva, sin equals death, and tshuva represents red heifer. So the physical law is, if somebody physically comes in contact with a dead body, then they need a red heifer. Spiritually, what does it mean for you and I? It means when we make a mistake, right? We disconnect from the source. All right, we need a red heifer. We need to do tshuva. We need to come back. Take a look at text number 6. Very fascinating. Let me set this up for a second, though. The red heifer was unique in that it was the only offering, as we'll see soon, that were offered outside. It was offered outside the temple. Every other carbon, every other offering, even a sin offering, was offered inside, because a sin offering was for sins that were done by mistake. The red heifer is for conscious unplugging. It's for unplugging because I meant to unplug. Then you really need a red heifer. Okay, spiritually. Take a look at text number 6. Here's what the Rebbe says. The difference between the red heifer and other offerings is that the other offerings, every other offering pretty much, they were offered inside the temple courtyard. Not so the red heifer, which was offered outside the temple, outside the courtyard. This is because the idea of the red heifer is to emerge from impurity to purity. In other words, it's going from outside back inside. The red heifer, why do you need a red heifer? Because you unplug. So when you unplug, where are you? You're outside. You're trying to get back in. So where did you bring the red heifer from? Outside. You with me on this? You're not inside. The reason why I need a red heifer is because you're outside the temple. You're not in the temple anymore. You unplugged. In the context of religious experience, the Rebbe says this refers to the work of a Baal Tshuva, a penitent. That is to say that all of the other offerings represent the worship of righteous people who are not prone to forbidden behavior. So, in other words, every other, even sin offering, even when the Torah talks about a sin offering, it's not a malicious, intentional sin. We're talking about inadvertent sin. You made a mistake. That's not unplugging. That's, I made a mistake. Whoops. So you're still in the temple, right? Not so the red heifer, which is the worship of the penitent. In other words, someone who consciously said, God, no, thank you, I'm out. Therefore, it's offered outside of the temple. So I hope what's very clear is the spiritual parallel. In other words, we have a red heifer that is needed when someone comes in contact with death, but that's all the physical. That's all the tangible manifestation. But what's the spiritual component? What's the soul of this? What's the energy of this mitzvah? The energy of this mitzvah is very simple. When we choose to defy God, we say to God, no, thank you. God, that's your opinion. I don't care right now. I got my own agenda. At that point, what are we doing? We are unplugging from God. We're saying to God, adios. See you later, right? See you later. And by the way, we do this, again, I started the class. This is a safe space. Right? Can we be honest here? Let's be honest. We make mistakes. Well, we don't only make mistakes of like, oh, whoops, I didn't realize. We make mistakes, i.e., we choose to unplug sometimes. We're like, you know what? I'm going to take some me time. God, see you later. And at that time, we find ourselves outside the temple, right? We're not inside the temple. We're outside the temple. Where are we? In our own private spaces. And it's from that place the Torah tells us that there is a way back. That's the remarkable idea here. There is a way back. That's the point. When the circuit breaks, you can go fix it, right? When you unplug, you can plug back in, right? There is a way to get back. That is the beauty of Judaism. There are paths, there are spiritual paths, religions, etc., worldviews that say that if you do this, that, or the other, oh, that's it. Now you're done. You're finished. You're doomed eternally. And Judaism says, you can choose to unplug, you can find yourself in a place of death, and you can still have a path back. That is the beauty of Judaism. There is a red heifer, there is a path back. Now, what is it about the red heifer? What is it about the red heifer ritual that evokes the idea of tshuva? I'm going to tell you something remarkable. I'm not going to tell you. It's in text number 7. Let's take a look at this. This is unbelievable about the red heifer. You want to know why the red heifer symbolizes tshuva in the physical way? Take a look at this. Text 7. We burn the carcass of the red heifer. Why? To remove and expunge 3 of its elements, fire, air, and water, leaving only the element of earth, i.e. ashes. So let me just explain that for a moment. The ancients believed that everything in existence was comprised of 4 elements, fire, air, water, and earth. So when you burn something, you remove the fire extinguishes the fire, the air and the water are all burnt up, and all that's left is ashes, which is earth. Spiritually, he says, back inside, this represents the idea of burning the passions of our animal soul. What? Time out before we go further inside. What happens, right? You came in contact with death, so now you're outside the temple, and now you take an animal, a red heifer, and you burn it. What does that mean? Here we go. It represents the burning of passions of our animal soul, of our inner animal. When we experience an attraction or desire for a physical allure, a forbidden physical allure, we must strip the desires, soiled garments, the physical objects in which our desires are vested. After these garments are stripped, we are left with a generic desire analogous to the ashes that are left after the red heifer is burned. This desire can then be redirected to the service of God. This is a remarkable concept. Listen to this. We talk about like passion or desire. So we have a forbidden desire, a forbidden passion for something that God does not want us to desire, right? And that constitutes sin and disconnection. Oh, whoops, now we're out. Now we're out of the temple, so to speak. Now we're disconnected, we're unplugged, and oh boy, that's not a good place to be in. So how do you get back? Red heifer. What do you do with the red heifer? You burn it. How does that help? What am I burning? Here's the deal. What you do is you're burning, think about it, a red heifer is a big animal, and you reduce it to the most essential substance, ashes. What that means is you had this big desire, this big temptation, this big, we would say in Hebrew, taiva, this big, desire that was not holy, unholy. So what do? You burn it down and you reduce it to the core. What's the core? The core is passion. And now that you reduce it to passion, you can use the passion for something holy. Are you with me? You deconstruct the object of the passion. You reduce it down to its core, which is passion itself. And now you utilize the passion for something holy, for something divine. Does that make any sense what I'm saying? You take the passion. Yeah. You burn down the cow. You burn down the taiva. You burn down the temptation. You're left with the ashes. From there, reconstruct. You add the ashes to living water. You now rebuild with those ashes. Everything's burned. DPP was not talking about a red heifer. It was talking about a sin offering or other offerings. This is red heifer is different. Everything is burned. You reduce it to ashes, and then you add the ashes to living water, and then you sprinkle. What's the point? You're regenerating passion, the core passion, but you're reconstructing it in a holy environment as opposed to an unholy environment. Imagine somebody who has, somebody who's like out of control, like just absolutely passionate about something that's sinful, right? Oh man, so what do you do with that? Okay, so imagine if you could destroy the direction to which that passion is being aimed and instead direct it somewhere else. Wouldn't that be great? Okay? Imagine a kid in a classroom. And Marasara, you taught me this. When I used to run the Hebrew school here at Chabad in town. And on occasion we had, sometimes children are a little rambunctious, right? Especially on a Sunday morning. It's like, right? So we once had a situation, there was a child who was, very, very excited. So I asked Marasara because she's an expert in education. And I said, so like, give me some advice. The teacher's asking for advice and, I don't feel, I need to consult the higher authority. So Marasara told me, channel the energy, make this child the assistant, make this child the helper, bring the child in to direct it. Instead of, the child has a lot of energy. So it's going to be expressed somehow. So instead of being expressed in making disruption, channel the energy to be constructive, to help out the lesson. Now it sounds intuitive, right? Okay, not always so intuitive. Sometimes, the biggest innovations sound the simplest, but it's a powerful idea. The powerful idea is, in essence, burn down the cow, the negative manifestation, how it's manifesting, reduce it to the core, and from the core rebuild it in a healthy fashion. Does that make sense? So instead of investing all the energy of the person in a sinful way, burn it down. Take the ashes, add it to holy water. Holy water, that doesn't sound right. Add it to living water. Sounds like a different faith, right? You add it to living water, Mayim Chayim, Al Keli, in a container. And then from there, you can get back. So this is the spiritual dynamic. This is, so there's two red heifers. There's the technical red heifer, right? In ancient times, when a person touched a dead body or was under the same roof as a dead body, they needed the physical ashes of the red heifer to become purified to go into the temple. Okay, what does it mean? What does it mean spiritually? What does it mean for us today? Okay, so what is coming in contact with death? Sin, intentional, premeditated, full-blown sin. And now we're out of the holy space, we're out of the temple. And from there, take that cow, burn it down, take the ashes, add it to water. There's a path back. It's called teshuvah. There's always a way back. And now we have the answer to the question. I asked before, if not everyone went to Jerusalem for Passover, why do we need to read that this week in the Torah portion? Why do we need to read about the red heifer? See what the Rebbe says? Because we all need a red heifer. Because we all need a red heifer. It's not only for those that went to Jerusalem, technically when the temple stood. We all today, right now, we all need a red heifer. Because in our lives, if we're being honest, as I started today's class, if we're being honest, there are areas in which we're choosing to unplug. There are areas, all of us, no exception. There's a text here that I think is pretty necessary to read right now. A text from King Solomon. King Solomon was pretty wise, I think, right? Text number 10. I'm going to read this one. Page 202. All right, I'm going to scroll quickly to it because, we just skipped from text 5 to text 10. Don't worry, you're in good hands. Consider me your Uber driver. Text number 10. Allstate. Text number 10. What's that other one? Progressive. What's that funny? Oh, liberty. Text 10. Here we go. From Ecclesiastes. For there is no righteous person on earth who does good and sins not. Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechta. It's impossible for there to be someone righteous who does not sin. Now you're gonna say, what about a tzaddik? What about a rebbe? Okay, there's exceptions to every rule. But here's the rule. The rule is ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechta, which means that if we're being honest, we are all in the same boat. We have all done things in which we have chosen to unplug. We've said to God, I appreciate your input. I thank you for your advice. I appreciate what you want. But honestly, I would rather do what I want. So, boop, and we unplugged. And in that space of unplugging, in that space of basically defiance of our source, defiance of our essence, the Torah reminds us. The Torah reminds us that there is a way back. There is always a way back. But it's not going to be easy. Not that it's too hard, but it's not going to, you have to burn it down. You have to take the manifestation of our energy, burn it down, reduce it to ashes, and from that, rebuild it in a healthy way. Don't kill desire. There's nothing wrong with desire. The problem is when desire is manifest in a spiritually unhealthy or undesirable space. So take the passion, take the core essence of that red heifer, and then add it to the pure water, add it to the living water, and rebuild from there. That is why we read about the red heifer on this Shabbat, why we read it for everybody, because everybody has something to fix. Everybody has a red heifer that needs to be burned down, and we need to start again. Everyone in our lives finds ourselves on one occasion or another having unplugged from the source and needing desperately to plug back in. So on this Shabbat, we stand up in shul and we're all honest, and we say, you know what? I think we all need to hear about the red heifer. Now I know the question. Now there's another question. So why don't we read the red heifer every week? Sounds like we need to read it all the time. Why specifically this time? Okay, so for that, of course, we have another element, which is, of course, Passover is coming, and as a preparation for Passover, which is the idea of rebirth, right? Passover is rebirth. So if we're talking about rebirth and regeneration, and which is the essentially the idea of plugging back in. So a prerequisite for that, of course, is burning down the cow, burning down the heifer and the red heifer, and starting again with that core ashes mixed together with the water. So that, my friends, is the lesson from tonight's class for this Shabbat. This Shabbat is called Parshas Para. It's the section of the Paraduma that we read. And the message for us is, no matter where we are, no matter who we are, we will, at some point or another, we will find ourselves outside. Due to our own choosing, we'll find ourselves outside. I'm not talking about the stuff that we made a mistake. Then you're still inside, and then you don't need a red heifer. Talking about the stuff that you and I chose deliberately, intentionally, we unplugged. It happens because we're human. If we want to pretend it didn't happen, then who benefits, right? Who benefits? So the message here is we will all find ourselves at some point or another, or many points in time, outside. And the message here is we have the ability to get back in. We are not stuck outside. We're not locked out. There's a way back in. There's the process called the red heifer. Burn it down, start again, right? Let it go. Let the object of the passion subside and refocus our direction in a holy space. Redirect the energy. You're very excited about whatever. Be excited about good things. Be excited about a mitzvah, excited about Torah study, excited about helping someone else out. Be excited about the good things, not about the negative things. There is a way back. That's the message of tonight. And I want to end with this point, and that is that when we find ourselves back inside, it's always better than before. Because the nature of truth, the nature of repentance is that when we go out and then come back in, if we do it right, we're back in a much deeper place, in a much better place than we were before. That's the nature of tshuva, because the energy that is infused in that experience of going from outside to inside, the energy that's expended. If we find ourselves outside, to get back in requires a lot of energy. We got to burn down a cow. We got to take the ashes, mix it with water. All that energy fuels the movement back inside and then propels us forward in a much greater level, which is why the Talmud says, we've quoted this so many times, the place where those that have done tshuva stand, the greatest tzaddik cannot reach that place. It's so much higher than someone who never left and got back in. If we walked out and came back in, it's a much deeper experience than the guy who never left, because there's a purity there, but it doesn't have the same energy. Someone who left and has to get back in, you have to fight your way back in, right? That fighting itself creates depth. And so in the final analysis, I want to reiterate how I started, and that is that we're all imperfect, and there's no point to hide imperfection. I mean, look, I'm not saying that we should all broadcast it either. That's also not nishken tachlis. There's no point to that either. But what I am suggesting is that we be honest with ourselves and recognize, what is it that I need to burn down? What is it that I need to redirect? What is it? In which points am I finding myself outside that I need to climb back inside, and then strive? And we're not going to be perfect, even in the act of reclamation and getting back in and shuvah and red heifering. We're still not going to be perfect, and still we do the work. All right. I saw that so that formally concludes at least what I wanted to share tonight. I know there's a lot more text inside, but I also did notice, I also want to give a chance for folks to weigh in, questions, comments. Made sense, Elio?
Yes, it all made sense, and I know we have teshuvah, but there's different teshuvahs than it. From what you said, you volitionally unplug. If that's the case, then the red heifer is needed.
Right.
But today we just have teshuvah, I mean, not knocking teshuvah, but that's teshuvah.
You're saying it's kind of like blanket, it's not tailored?
Right.
Well, we have to tailor it. I think one of the outcomes of tonight's class is to recognize that tshuva is not just some sort of like magic wand that like just fixes everything without doing the actual work. Tshuva really means there's no magical wand. Even back in the day when you had to really bring a red heifer, it still wasn't magical. You had to do the inner work. The inner work is an assessment. Okay, so where is my energy going in a misdirected way? And then I mean, today it's like the buzzword, like burn it all down, right? But like, what do I need to burn down because it's just simply unhealthy? What part of my life do I need to just eliminate, but not vaporize? What can I reduce down to the core that I can then I can then allow to flourish and grow, but where it's healthy to grow, not in the unhealthy space. I'm burning that down so that I can grow it in the healthier space. I think that's the key. I did notice some chats that popped up over here before, and it was kind of coming up rapidly, so I didn't have a chance to read them. So I'm going to take a moment quickly to read. Where to go now? To read the chat. Love is blind. Good. Loop. Interest. The origin of Torah is interesting. Yes, I agree with you, Ariel. I think that's very profound. The Haftorah, as some of you know, is read in a minor key, whereas the Torah is read in a more like upbeat thing. And I'm not a musical expert, but it's kind of like when you play it, huh? Oh, all right. Okay, well, there you go. So thank you for Ariel for weighing in on this, because you know what you're talking about. So it's in a more minor key. It's solemn, and she's suggesting here in the comments that maybe because the reason why they introduced that is because they couldn't read the Torah, so they were in a state of mourning. I would agree with that. In fact, I liken it to Super Mario Brothers, right? When you're above ground, very upbeat, then you go down the tunnels, right? Then you go some tunnels you can go down, you duck down, if this makes sense to you, it's epic. I'm calling it. If you don't know what this means, then if you don't know what this means, then you're like, what is he on? I'm on nothing. This is straight up Super Mario.
It's a game.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, Super Mario. Yeah, legit. Yeah, straight up Super Mario Brothers. Absolutely. Right. So when you go down underground, it's like it's like a little bit like darker and like more mysterious. So that's how I think of like the Haftorah. It's like Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher B'cha b'neviim. It's more melancholy. It's definitely more of a. It's not only for the blessings; it's for the actual reading itself. It's a different, straight up a different drop. The song is like, I don't know the terms. Is it minor, major? I don't know minor, major. I don't know my keys, my notes, my C's from my D's. But what I do know is that the Torah reading is typically more happy, I guess you could call it. At least that's the energy, whereas the Haftorah is a little bit more of that lower key thing. Tumtum, we answered, found this mournful. Oh, there we go. See, I'm going through this in real time. Yes, so that was confirmed. Sleep is 160 of death. Is the high burned? Yes. Mayhem. Oh, mayhem. Exactly. That's from that commercial. Mark. for someone who needs the red heifer because they touched the forbidden was a mitzvah? Oof, excellent question. Mark is asking, sometimes a person comes in contact with death, not as a sin, but as a mitzvah, right? Because let's say Chevra Kadisha, the burial society. So you're doing a mitzvah, now they need a red heifer. So not every time you needed a red heifer means that you unplugged because you did something wrong and you didn't care. Sometimes you came in contact with death as a mitzvah. Mark pulls out the trump card. Done. Boom. See you later. So, folks, I gotta go. It's been real. No, so it's an excellent question. And I think what it comes down to is sometimes in wanting to do something positive, we might find ourselves doing something, negative, compromising our values. So I don't know that it's going to perfectly, align, because I think that, whenever you discuss practical things on a spiritual level, I don't know if it aligns in every single detail. And I think you're asking a very interesting and good detail. But I think also there are some times that when, we try to, we have calculations, how it's really a good thing and whatever it is. And in truth, we're unplugging. Now you're asking, but what if it's honestly a good thing? Are we still finding ourselves outside the temple? So I don't know. I don't know if it lines up perfectly, but I think sometimes at least the Yetzer Hara, the human inclination, can convince us. Again, I don't think I'm addressing your question directly, but I think, conceptually we can kind of, play around with this idea that sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, this is a bad thing. This is unplugging. No. This is a mitzvah. I'm doing a good deed. This is great. Watch this, unplug, right? So we have to be careful about that also. I don't think it perfectly answers your question. It's a good question. Okay, so that's the point. So this week, again, to summarize, this week is Paraduma, Red Heifer, and it reminds us practically before Passover, Paschal Lamb, etc. But what about everyone else? Everyone has a red heifer to bring. That's the message. Even if you're not going to Jerusalem, even if you don't have a Paschal Lamb to bring, everyone's got a red heifer. Because we all, at some point, we're all going to be outside the temple, and we all going to be trying to get back in. And for that, we need a red heifer.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Karen.
We just learned something that was beyond King Solomon's comprehension.
Oh, good. King Solomon said, I don't understand the red heifer. And so what do we do tonight? We explained it. So take that, King Solomon.
Right.
No, be respectful. Right. So yeah, right. King Solomon. Now, what does it mean? I think the way we understand this is King Solomon understood certain elements, but maybe not everything. Maybe he didn't understand what Mark asked. Maybe that was the one point of the red heifer that didn't make sense. Like, I don't understand the red heifer. Why? Because there's a mitzvah sometimes that good. Right. That might be the detail of it. But I want to make an announcement before everyone leaves. I do want to encourage everyone who can. If you can make it tomorrow night at 8 p.m., it's a Zoom-only event. You're going to love it. This is called the Joy Factory. It's a happiness workshop. I think we can all use an extra dose of happiness, no matter how happy we are. It's still the month of Adar. We have 60 days this year of joy. But the question is, so what do we do? Like, hit the joy button? Like, what is that? There is no button. So what do we do? So we're going to explore tomorrow night, led by Mrs. Rachel Schusterman. We're going to explore what is at the core of happiness? What's at the heart of happiness? How do we go from oi to joy? That is tomorrow night, based on classic Jewish wisdom, modern positive psychology, 8 p.m., Thursday night, March 24th. There is no better time to jump on the Joy Factory than tomorrow night. Please join me. You will love it. And you'll be happier. And then we'll all be happier. And that's a good thing. By the way, the greatest way to do tshuva is tshuva from a place of simcha, from a place of joy. So I'll conclude with this story. I love this story. There was the Baal Shem Tov was once traveling through a town. He traveled all the time. He was traveling through a town on the high holidays, and the people of the town were complaining about their chazan, their cantor. They said, "This chazan, he doesn't know what he's doing. You got to speak to him." He says, "Why? What's wrong?" He sings the very sad, solemn prayers on Yom Kippur with a happy tune. Not do-do-do-do-do-do. No, he sings with a happy tune. Who does that? It's like the sad stuff, and he sings with a happy tune. He's missing the whole, he doesn't know what he's saying. Baal Shem Tov says, okay, let me meet with him. Meets with the chazan. He says, the community is saying that you're singing happy tunes on Yom Kippur for the very sad prayers. What's going on? Is that true? He says, yeah. He says, why? He says, look, imagine if I was called by the king in employment. The king says, I want to hire you. For what? I want you to clean the palace, make it look beautiful. He said that would be such an honor. The king wants me to clean the palace, to clean his chambers. That'll be amazing. Be unbelievable. I get a chance to make the king's palace beautiful. Isn't that what Yom Kippur is? Right? Each of us is like a palace. Each of us is a temple for God. And we have an opportunity in Yom Kippur to clean ourselves out, so to speak, and to make it look beautiful. Shouldn't I sing with a happy tune? And so even when we do tshuva, should it be sad? We have the opportunity to plug back in. Is there a greater simcha than that? Greater joy? God gives us the opportunity to connect, to step back into the temple. So my friends, let's sing a happy tune. And I'll see you tomorrow night. All right. We'll see you all soon. Have a wonderful night. Erev Tov. Pleasure. Don't forget, grab some popcorn. We'll see you guys. Take care, everybody.